How about you guys? Response to that?
I want to have this actually go in the direction. 3 things. Simpson Bowles, I'd like to hear the tax people address that. 2, the role of unions in keeping the criminal justice system in place and growing very healthily in California. And 3, Cook County has the largest criminal justice system of any county in the country. And I'd like to hear how you would address, dealing with, Cook County has some major budget problems, as does the city of Chicago. And we have the largest criminal justice system in the world, in the United States, Cook County, and one of the largest healthcare systems in the United States. So I'd like to see, here's something on that and what we as voters should be, understanding and paying attention to.
That was a lot of things in one section there. So, if we can cover maybe one of her ideas and go from there, that's a lot of stuff. That's a whole discussion in itself. So let's see if we can do that. And if we don't cover all of them right now, then we can work in that direction toward the question and answer section. Okay.
And what is Simpson
You
Bowl?
know what?
Go ahead, microphone.
This is also set up to the speakers of the church. These are off, so that doesn't do you any good.
I think the voice.
This one was buzzing.
I think the voices will carry enough to be picked up.
Yeah, it's just mostly for their cameras that we have to have the other one. So.
Well, regardless, hopefully it'll work somehow on the cameras. I'm only going to cover the Simpson Bowles tax side of things for now. I mean, I have opinions on some of the other stuff, as you may guess. My title at the Heartland Institute is a director for the Center for Transforming Education. Yes, education is one of the solutions to the criminal justice problem, but dumping more money into the existing system is not going to be a solution. I'm for changing the existing system. That, again, is a conversation in and of itself. Simpson Bowles, for those of you who don't know, because it's been brought up, was a commission that was, I don't know whether it was started under Obama or whether it was something that first was floated under Bush and then over to Obama, but it was basically a spending tax commission, or a commission on how do we fix the budget problems, and it was bipartisan, and it basically said something neither party wanted to hear. First, you're going to have to raise some taxes somewhere. And one of the best places to start is they suggested getting rid of what they call tax expenditures, which we all know as deductions and or complexity and or tax credits, and the highly complex scheme of tax credits that are lobbied for by special interests on all sides of the aisle. The other thing they said is you're going to have to reform entitlements. I don't necessarily like every single thing Simpson Bowles came out with, but let's put it this way. If only the Republican Party's happy, it's not going to necessarily be a real fix, and if only the Democratic Party's happy, it's not going to be a real fix. And I'll just quickly jump into the idea of what a better system is, and a better system will be broader, lower rates, flatter, fairer, and spread over more income sources, and that cannot be done in neither system. I would suggest that no system for taxation will work under if you leave the existing Social Security system, the existing Medicare system, and the existing Medicaid system in place, there isn't enough money in the world to tax people to fix those systems and still have a viable economy.
We talked about a lot of these things. Simpson Bowles. They made some good recommendations. They made some problematic recommendations. A lot of the entitlement program issues wouldn't exist if we were responsible stewards over them and if we hadn't modified them in irresponsible ways over time. Social Security would be solvent forever if we hadn't rated it for the last 35 years, the surplus that it generated to fund current operations. But we made the decision to rate it. So Social Security, far from being a bankrupt system, is a system that was incredibly well designed and would in fact be solvent ad infinitum if we hadn't used it like we were not supposed to use it for current operating expenses. The growth in healthcare costs It's interesting. Of all the major OECD nations, we're one of the very few that doesn't have nationalized health care. And it has resulted in a system that is very expensive on the one hand. It doesn't generate very good outcomes on the other hand. So we're at the high end of the expense level when you look at international comparisons, and middle into low, depending on what you look at in health outcomes, like infant mortality rates, very high infant mortality rates for industrialized nations, etc. And right now in America and in Illinois, we have a significant portion of the population that is either entirely uninsured or on Medicaid, 33%. Shouldn't be the case. So we really need a substantial health care reform that both includes a cost containment component as well as ensures everyone has access to health care. On the education thing, Bruno and I are just going to have to disagree a little bit on that one. So Bruno, I apologize for that one. Bruno and I do this a lot, so we actually get along with each other. But I'm going to say something that none of you expect. Our education system is not, in fact, broken.
That's right.
It is not broken as a system. It's underfunded. Let me tell you why I come to that conclusion. Everyone talks about these international benchmarkings, and the PISA exam is the one that everyone uses comparing America to other nations around the world and how we perform. And on PISA, America overall scored middle, a 500 score when the average for OECD nations was about 490 something. So right about at average.
What's PISA?
Program International something.
Standardized.
Yeah, it tests critical thinking in math and science and your own language or ability to think. It is the benchmark. It's the international benchmark. So we've got everybody all upset. And Finland is number one in the world, and Shanghai, China, and Canada. We came below all of them. We did something interesting. We adjusted for poverty. So we looked at the schools in America that had 0 to 20% poverty. And what we found, no, 0 to 10% poverty. And on the PISA school exams, they had the highest scores in the world. Number one in the world, over 550. Better than Finland. Better than Canada, etc. We went to the next level of poverty in performance. Looked at 10% to 20%. They scored in the high 530s. Third overall in the world, still ahead of Canada and every other nation with a similar poverty profile. It's only when poverty got up to about 50% that American scores fell through the bottom. Guess which schools in America are highly funded, have top flight teachers, rich academic program, tons of mentoring? Those school districts in affluent communities with very low poverty. And they spend a lot more on child instruction and in induction and mentoring and on teacher salary than those schools with higher poverty. And it's those schools in higher poverty which have less resources that are underperforming both internationally and nationally. And I will point out one more thing. This is nothing new. Who said, this is a question for you, you asked us a question, I'm going to ask you all a question. Who said back in 1972 that there are grave disparities in educational funding in America, not just between the states, but within individual states? That these grave disparities have risen to a national concern from a local concern because of the tie between educational attainment and economic viability in a modern economy. And that if we don't put more money into those communities that don't have it, and part of what they found was that money in fact matters. If we don't put the money in, we're abandoning those children in poverty communities and middle-income communities to no future. Who said that?
Millhouse.
The Nixon Commission on Education found that in 1972. And for the last 40 years, we've done nothing as a nation to address these grave disparities. So, as it turns out, those communities with high wealth are high performing, have great teaching, have a great academic program, and no one else does. And if you don't look at the data and the reality and start recognizing what these long-term trends, so the achievement gap between whites and blacks in America academically, do you know that it narrowed every year from the 1950s through 1980? So that by 1980 it was almost gone. And then, with the Reagan Revolution, we started disinvesting in social services, wraparound services, and public education. And the achievement gap blew up. Now, why would that be? I don't know all the data nationally on this, but I'll give you Illinois-specific data. African American children in Illinois are clustered in communities of poverty. 55% of the black children in Illinois, 55%, attend the 5% of school districts with the greatest poverty. Over half. And in Illinois, schools in poverty, as far as money available to spend on instruction, spend about $2,000 less per kid than they do in affluent communities. So they're spending less, and African Americans have been singled out for a particularly lower funded education. Literally, over 9 out of 10 African American children in our state attend school districts that have concentrated poverty levels of 30% or greater. Poverty becomes very expensive as a sort of cost to overcome in educating a child when concentration levels hit 25%.
That has to do with
No, that has to do with our funding system. But I'm telling you, we over-rely on property taxes to fund schools. We need a different mechanism of funding schools. To get back to the bigger point, the education system itself isn't broken. It is delivering the best education in the world as measured by the international benchmark in those communities with adequate resources.
I don't know how many people, I do not know how many people believe that. I don't know how many people wish to continue. It's not true. First of all, it's very simple. The United States of America spends more on children and on per child in education than any country in the world. There may be 1 or 2 countries where at the high school level a little bit more money is spent, maybe Switzerland. But this is a fact, and you know, Ralph was saying people aren't entitled to they're entitled to their opinions, but they're not entitled to their own facts. The United States of America has dumped gazillions of dollars into the education system, not just from Nixon on, and not just from Reagan on, and not just from Johnson on. We have been spending money on education in this country like crazy, and the money is being wasted. And the money's not, because yeah, I think it's, I'd be the last person in the world to say we ought to spend less on education. And quite frankly, this goes way beyond the federal taxation debate or the taxation debate that we're talking about. But you simply can't say, well, there's this one test and we did great. There are ways, how many people believe there's ways to massage data? Do people lie with data? And can they massage a fact to look like one thing with data and another fact with data? Now, Ralph is doing a great job of defending a system that is failing. But the fact is that it's unbelievably expensive, and it isn't educating America's kids the way it needs to. It's much more expensive than it needs to be at the suburban level, and its results are overrated there because it's not the system, it's the socioeconomic status of the suburbs. And here in the city, what's the national average on education spending? Does anybody know, roughly?
I don't know about the average, I know what it is in Chicago.
What is it?
Well, it's about $8,000 per graduate school student and about close to $10,000 now for high school.
When you include all the different inputs that go into the system, it's actually somewhere around 10 or 11,000, maybe as high as 12, depending on whether or not you look at the various building funds and where the money's going. We've been dumping money into building schools that may or may not be necessary. We've been dumping money into unbelievable amounts of administration and assistant coordinators and directors, assistant directors and coordinators, assistant superintendents, pay, pensions. I could show you a graph that talked about what we're spending on Illinois, where it says 13% student growth, then it shows what the spending has been, and these numbers were over from 1985 to 2003. Michael Madigan used them in his school funding thing, talking about, and this was Michael Madigan's own graph that talked about where the money went.
I don't think you're disagreeing with it.
Well, no, I think I am disagreeing, because A, he's saying the
Well,
system
the money needs to trickle down.
Well, it needs to
bureaucracy.
trickle down. It needs to shower down. And it needs to stop going into the payroll expansion, over the production of government jobs and good job system, and then it turns around and the money needs to start following the child to the education system that works for that child. Now, I will debate Ralph, and quite frankly, if he's saying he wants to respond to this, I think we should take this over to another CAN TV debate with Ralph.
Be happy to,
But-
Bruno.
but-
Just a couple of quick responses.
The fact is, we're spending a lot, and the results are not.
We are
it's not
spending a
just
lot
piece of-
overall, and his basic comparison is accurate about our high overall spending compared to other nations, but it's apples to oranges comparison. And none of these other nations do their education system pay for the health care or the retirement of their teachers. And that is such a significant component of the American spending that when you take that out of the international benchmarking, we drop way down in our per child
Doesn't
expenditure.
make any difference,
So-
it's still part of the thing.
Well, no, it makes a big difference because it's a cost those other systems do not have to pay. So when you're saying, what are you spending per kid, isolate out what you're spending per kid on education. Okay? Teacher's salary and what goes into the classroom and technology. And when you isolate out those inputs, we're low spending. Okay? So it just depends on how you compare the data sets, but you need to compare data sets apples to apples. That is number one. Number two, teachers. Finland is now the envy of the world. The highest paid profession in Finland is what? Teachers. It's the number one paid profession. When the Prime Minister of Finland was asked what they do to get rid of their bad teachers, he said, we don't have bad teachers. We don't have bad teachers to get rid of because getting into the colleges that teach teachers is very difficult. You've got to be the top of the top. Then we have a credentialing process that you have to demonstrate you know how to teach before you ever get into a classroom. Then we pay them a ton of money so that we know that we're always attracting the top end into the pipeline. What has happened to the American pipeline of teachers is that back when our education system was bar none, the best in the world top to bottom, look at the 30s, 40s, 50s, etc. Guess what was going on in labor markets for women? They had no career choices. You could be a teacher, you could be a nurse. That was it. The best and the brightest went into teaching and nursing. Now, with the advent of feminism in the 60s and 70s, and the opening up of new career paths to women, they could suddenly become doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs. So they stopped going into teaching because a labor market that paid a salary predicated on an abundance of overqualified people fighting to get into it, i.e. very low overall wages, never adjusted to be competitive with the new professions that women could have. Lawyer, doctor, whatever. So the pipeline of highly talented, motivated individuals diminished. So now within this diminished pipeline, you still get quality people, but fewer than before. You have a great disparity between affluent communities and middle income and low communities in what they pay teachers. So the best and the brightest teachers that enter the system go to the affluent communities for the higher.
Okay.
Simple.
I'm going to let you rebut, but I'm going to go this way first, and then I'm going to come back to you. These guys, I don't want them sitting down here. No, it's perfectly fine. You guys are giving great information, and
Bruno and I could talk all night.
you know, yeah, for the most part, I mean, we're seeing some disagreement here, but at the same time, we're seeing the same thing, that we need change, and we need reform, and in a bunch of different ways. And so that's really, you know, where we're headed with this. So I'm going to head this way. I see some of you guys have been jotting down some notes while they were talking, so I want to head this way and see what you guys have to say.
Well, just connecting the conversation back to the criminal justice system, I think that it is true. We have to defund criminal justice and fund education. That's how you keep people out of prison. If you educate, income levels rise, economic opportunity opens up. Jobs, you know, we have to create jobs and training to keep people out of prison. The problem with that, to your point, why is the prison system so overcrowded and populated, is that, once again, it's an economic system. It's a system that oppresses people economically, i.e. black and brown people, poor people. When we think about the prison context of being a prison industrial complex, thinking of it as, if you think of it as a multinational corporation, you have so many different layers. When we talk about unions, you have to look at, you know, everyone from the correctional officer, the warden, the food service that feeds prisoners, and we haven't even got to the discussion about privatization of prisons. So when you have all these things at play that are bringing in money to the system, or the connections to other systems of privatization, I was reading an article, I can't remember the exact companies, but there are a lot of companies that source their employees from privatized prisons, doing customer service. You know, back in the day, we think of the old image of the chain gang, but now we're in a more modern day sense of a chain gang, which once again is a prison industrial complex. And I'm not a proponent of, you know, releasing everyone from prison, but the honest to God fact is that a lot of people in prison because of drug cases, not violent offenders. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's about 5% of the prison population that has life in prison. So that means that 95% of people in prison are going to come back to our communities. And if they don't have jobs, if they don't have economic opportunity, we're just going to keep creating that cycle, the revolving door.
Okay, I'm going to go back to taxes for a second, and the schools and privatization and spending too much money. The interesting thing when you hear people talk about the fact that we're spending too much on our schools and what that, and all the rhetoric around that, is what's the alternative? And when you look at the alternative, don't ask them for the alternative. Ask them where they send their kids. And ask them how much they're spending at the schools per child on their children. That is the system we need to have. That's the system that, if that's right for them, that should be right for everyone else. Right? That's a discussion no one wants to have. You know, when officials talk about they hate the public school system and it's not good enough and they're wasting too much money, yet I send my kid to a $25,000 a year high school. Well, they spend $25 grand a year on your kid, right? Compared to the 8 or 10 or whatever they spend in Chicago. But you're looking to, turning back to the criminal justice system, if you look at Cook County, it costs us, it's pretty even around the state, about $90,000 a year to incarcerate youth. Okay, youth. $90,000 a year. We spend time educating them. But if they push you down the stairs or they steal your handbag or whatever, we'll spend $90,000 a year incarcerated. Once again, cutting that is out of the discussion. And the fact that that even exists tells you something about the society. Privatizing the criminal justice system has been a really horrible idea. Every private prison that's gone into place ends up costing more than the state-run facility. But once again, that's not something, when I'm talking about in Philadelphia, drug corruption, a couple of judges went to prison for sending youths for minor infractions to the private juvenile facility where we got kickbacks. So that's the reality of privatizing that in the criminal justice system. If we're going to make changes to the system, either in education or in the criminal justice system, we have to get to a point where in our society, every child who's 10 looks and dreams about what his life is going to be after 30. Right? That is not how it is in Chicago. You can go into black and brown communities and talk to youth that are 10 and 12. They think they're either going to be dead or doing a long prison term by the time they're 30. That's a serious problem. How do you adjust? I don't know how you adjust that. One, I would think giving their parents jobs and an idea that they could get a living wage. But until you correct that problem, you're never going to correct communities. That's just the reality. That's what youth growing up in communities that most people don't ever go into or talk to, but want to cut the benefits that go into those communities. That's the reality. And until you change that, you're not gonna have any impact on the criminal justice system, right? Because they're just going to, it's very easy when you have nothing after 30 to go out and do whatever you want on the streets. And that ends up feeding the system, unfortunately.
What we had suggested to you earlier, when you speak of change and the redirection of funds, we're not speaking of what is going on currently. Yes, the system does need to be changed or somehow made right. We are looking at our future. We're looking at those young people. I heard you use the magical number 10 because that's the age at the juvenile center, from 10 to 17. We're hoping that at some point in time, we will be able to get into those schools and grasp those young minds immediately, have people who are concerned, who have a passion. Teaching requires a passion, not just you're looking for a paycheck, because no one can pay you enough to be with their child. So you must love it if you want to give the child the best. In this classroom, we want to offer the children everything, you know, kind of like this Miss Daly that just passed, starting this system where the kids can continue on in their arts. I don't believe they have music and art in school before. I had it in school. Did you guys have it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Choir, band.
And the teachers, when I came along, there were 25, 30 of us in the classroom, no helper. But Miss Rosenthal, whatever her name was at that time, had on her plaid dress with the little thing. And she came in prepared to teach us. This is where we want. We want our children to know that there's something other than being dead at 30. This starts early. And that's why we need those dollars, those tax dollars. We need them. We need some help. We need some help. And it is a fact that the principals get money, a little budget to work with, but we want to make sure they're spending it appropriately for the benefit of the children. This is how we're hoping for change. We want to work with the kids so there'll be a new pattern of thought, new ideas, knowing that the stars, you know, they can reach and they can keep reaching. They can set goals, short-term, intermediate, and long-term. And when you attain that, continue to something else. That's what we want. I'm done.
Excellent. You guys are doing an excellent job of answering my questions before I ask them. Which I like, the conversation is flowing. I'm going to give Bruno a chance to respond again to what we were talking about, because I kind of jumped over here before he got his rebuttal, and then I'm going on to the next question. So just to prepare everyone ahead of time in case there's any arguments or anything like that. We'll get to questions at the end. Let's just let them finish up and then we will.
I just want to be really quick here. The education debate is worth not just another hour on its own, but a whole week perhaps. It should be a college level course. And we can look at all the data and decide all the data. The fact is, at this moment in time, if we went to a Finnish system, a Finland-style system tomorrow, and imposed the same level of quality and the same rigorous quality control and teaching that Finland has, a very tiny country of maybe somewhere between 5 and 7.5 million white Lutherans. It's very similar to Sweden, which has a different system. If we did that, 75% of our current teachers would be out of job because they just couldn't do it. And I would suggest that if you want a Finnish system, you're looking at having to do something entirely different. That you have to plow that through our political system here in the United States. Sweden, which has numbers almost as good as Finland, did something very unique. They basically said, here's the money, go and open a school, come up with a solution, money follows the child with the best solution. Their system is doing very well as well. They're also a small country of 9.5 million white Lutherans. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of these solutions and how they work have to be looked at as how they might work in the United States of America, which is still to this day the most dynamic, diverse, and whatever term you want to use, melting pot society. I would suggest that an open system where the money follows the child is a far better solution than a top-down imposed, everybody has to be lawyer or doctor quality before they can start teaching. Now, as far as the money, we have 6.3 million people in public education in the United States of America. Only 3.2 million of them are teachers. I would ask whether we're talking about taxes, whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about entitlements, whether we're talking about prison systems, let's throw everything on the table. And let's, with the new technologies that are coming out, the fact that I can receive the entire history of and benefits and knowledge of mankind over this cell phone for a few $100s a month and $100 for the phone, tablet computers and everything else like that, let's question everything. And if the system has to change, let's throw everything on the table and change it. Maybe not radically and immediately, maybe not right away. But let's just toss everything on the table and not say, well, Social Security is off the table. Unions are off the table. Collective bargaining is off the table. Let's put everything on the table. And let's see what system works. And if we're honest, intellectually honest about changing things, then let's try some changes instead of saying, no changes. You can't change the system. I could go on for hours, as I'm sure Ralph could too, but I just wanted to say those things because it is not a shortage of spending that is the problem in the United States of America. It is, as you said, a prison industrial complex, it's a government education complex. It is a closed system of districts, unions, administrators, bond dealers. It is a cabal of inside interests that have purchased their legislation from the legislators, both parties, and it's time to say, you've had your 60, 70 years riding a gravy train, it's time to throw it all on the table.